Why did no text record their departure? This question hovers over the ancient plains of Sumer like a spectral wind, stirring the dust of ziggurats long abandoned and the faded impressions of styluses in clay. Across the vast expanse of Mesopotamia, in cities such as Nippur, and Eridu, scribes labored with unwavering diligence, inscribing every transaction, every celestial omen, every legal decree, and every offering to the gods. Yet nowhere do we find a line, a tablet, or a hymn that recounts the vanishing of the Anunnaki. Their presence was once so palpable, so woven into the social and cosmic fabric, that it seems almost impossible they could vanish without record. And yet, the clay is silent. Every tablet baked in the kiln and preserved against the erosion of time speaks with clarity about grain shipments, temple accounts, and the minutiae of daily governance, but not about the moment when these gods, whose names resonated in the very prayers and laws of humanity, ceased to walk among mortals. This absence is not merely an omission, it is a profound statement, a silence pregnant with meaning, suggesting that their departure was not an event to be chronicled, but a transformation to be deciphered. In the cool shadows of temple libraries, the meticulous hands of scribes recorded divine decrees with a precision bordering on obsession. Every god's rank, every priestly duty, every celestial appointment was catalogued in cuneiform. Yet the tablets reveal no farewell, no decree of exile, no celestial resignation. One wonders whether the Anunnaki, whose influence shaped the very notion of law and justice, could be contained within the boundaries of written record at all. Perhaps their essence was never meant to be captured as an event. Perhaps their significance transcended the temporal and the tangible. Their silence speaks to us more loudly than any tablet could, whispering of a transition from overt sovereignty to an intangible presence, a restructuring of divine authority beyond the gaze of human chroniclers. In the earliest narratives, the Anunnaki are depicted not merely as gods, but as architects of order, judges of morality, and arbiters of cosmic law. They convene in assemblies, deliberating over the fates of kings and commoners alike, their voices authoritative, measured, and absolute. These early texts present them as indispensable figures within a framework that balances the needs of humanity with the dictates of the cosmos. Their presence is systematic, organized, and hierarchical. Each god has a clearly defined role. Each assembly has a defined purpose. The Anunnaki embody the notion that order, both divine and human, is inseparable from ritual, law, and bureaucratic procedure. The Sumerians, through their inscriptions, communicated not only the deeds of kings, but also the intricate functioning of the divine bureaucracy, revealing a worldview in which the celestial and terrestrial realms were intertwined in a carefully calibrated equilibrium. The Anunnaki were not merely mythic, they were functional, operational. In the earliest tablets, they appear as judges who oversee disputes, as legislators who sanction the codes of justice, and as enforcers who ensure that the sacred order is maintained. In these records, their influence is immediate, palpable, and necessary. The cosmological order they maintained mirrors the societal order on Earth. Authority, hierarchy, and accountability are reflected across both planes. Every ritual, every oath, every legal code bears their invisible signature, reminding humanity of the ever-present gaze of the divine. And yet, despite their omnipresence in law and ritual, the question lingers: if their authority was so absolute, why is there no record of their withdrawal, no tablet that recounts the moment they receded from human affairs? Herein lies the most profound enigma. No clay tablet, no hymn, no administrative record tells of their final exit. Unlike the meticulous recording of wars, treaties, and temple offerings, their disappearance, or transformation, leaves a void that is itself a text, a silence that must be interpreted. This absence is not mere negligence, it is emblematic. The Anunnaki did not vanish. They transitioned, their roles evolving alongside the civilizations they once directly governed. The Sumerian scribes, immersed in the precision of their craft, noted the tangible and measurable, but remained silent on that which defied categorization. Their disappearance from the record may signify a metamorphosis, a shift from visible authority to a subtle influence embedded in the structure of ritual, law, and myth. This silence compels modern scholars to read between the lines, to infer from omission what was never explicitly documented. The lack of explicit testimony about their departure is paradoxically revealing. It suggests that the Anunnaki were never merely temporal beings bound by history. They were frameworks, archetypes, mechanisms through which cosmic order was mediated. Their legacy persisted not in dramatic exits, but in the continued functioning of the systems they once directly oversaw. In essence, the Anunnaki transcended narrative, becoming woven into the very fabric of civilization itself, their influence imperceptible, yet enduring. The centuries of silence surrounding the Anunnaki have invited a proliferation of modern imaginings. In contemporary culture, particularly within the realm of speculative thought and pseudo-archaeology, they are recast as extraterrestrial visitors, beings of incomprehensible power who left Earth suddenly, leaving behind monumental artifacts and cryptic messages. These interpretations, while imaginative, often obscure the original significance of the Anunnaki as agents of order, law, and governance. Ancient texts never present them as aliens, but as deities integral to the structuring of society and the cosmos. The modern lens, with its fascination for the spectacular and the extraterrestrial, fills gaps left by silence with flights of fancy, but in doing so, it divorces them from the philosophical and societal functions they fulfilled. To understand the Anunnaki properly, one must return to the tablets themselves. They were architects of order, administrators of justice, and guarantors of ritual precision. Their influence, embedded in law codes, hymns, and temple rituals, demonstrates that their power was systemic rather than performative, bureaucratic rather than spectacular. Their absence in the records is therefore not an erasure, but an evolution, from visible authority to invisible infrastructure, from actors on the cosmic stage to the mechanisms underlying the performance itself. The ultimate inquiry, then, is reframed. The Anunnaki are not figures whose story ends in disappearance. They are exemplars of transformation, structural principles that persist beyond narrative closure. Our quest is not merely to ask, where did they go? But rather, how did they change? By tracing their influence through successive epochs, one observes a pattern of adaptation, from rulers of city-states to participants in a celestial bureaucracy to archetypes embedded in later theological systems. The Anunnaki's legacy is structural, philosophical, and symbolic. They remind us that the divine need not always be visible to exert influence, that authority can be inherited, transformed, and internalized by human consciousness. In their silence, they speak more profoundly than any tablet ever could, inviting us to ponder the nature of presence, absence, and the enduring rhythms of cosmic and human order. Why did the gods of old seem to bend to the currents of human ambition rather than remain immutable, eternal, above the fray of earthly politics? This question emerges as one examines the shifting sands of Mesopotamian history, where the rise and fall of kings left traces not only in stone and clay, but also in the very arrangement of the divine pantheon. The ascent of Sargon of Akkad, an improbable figure whose vision reshaped the landscape of city-states into a coherent empire, serves as the first example of how human ambition reoriented the cosmos itself. No longer did the independent city-states wield power as isolated entities. Under Sargon, they became integrated into a larger polity, a reflection of centralized authority that mirrored the reorganization of the divine realm. And so, the Anunnaki, once autonomous arbiters of order and justice, found themselves recalibrated, their roles subtly transformed to reflect the political unity imposed upon the human world. Sargon's unification of the city-states was not merely administrative, it was theological. In renaming cities and redefining divine hierarchies, he did not simply consolidate power over mortals, he reorganized the cosmos to mirror his earthly authority. The Anunnaki, previously figures of independent judgment and cosmic equilibrium, were now components within a broader celestial system, their decrees aligned with the mandates of a singular, imperial vision. Here, we see the intimate interplay between politics and theology. The gods themselves were not immune to the currents of power. They adapted, absorbed, and reflected the ambitions of kings who wielded both earthly and symbolic authority. It is a reminder that divinity in Mesopotamia was inseparable from human governance, that the patterns of earthly rule resonated in the heavens as they did on the ground. With the rise of Babylon and the consolidation under Hammurabi, the narrative of divine authority underwent another profound transformation. The epic of Enuma Elish chronicles Marduk's ascendancy, portraying a dramatic reordering of the pantheon. The Anunnaki, once independent actors with their own decrees and assemblies, became enforcers within the celestial bureaucracy presided over by Marduk. They were no longer rulers in their own right, they were agents, administrators within a larger cosmic hierarchy. Their authority was subordinated, their decisions harmonized to reflect the central will of a single god. This process mirrors the centralization of political power on Earth, where kings claimed divinely sanctioned authority and integrated previously independent city-states into an organized empire. The correspondence between political and divine centralization is striking. Just as Babylonian kings redefined governance to ensure loyalty and efficiency, so too were the Anunnaki restructured to reflect a unified celestial administration. Rituals, hymns, and legal codes were recast to emphasize Marduk's primacy, situating the Anunnaki as instruments rather than independent agents. In these texts, the divine bureaucracy is almost indistinguishable from human governance. Hierarchies, chains of command, and roles of enforcement all echo the organization of the empire below. One sees clearly that the transformation of the Anunnaki was not a loss of power, but a realignment, a subtle shift from autonomous authority to systemic function within a newly centralized order. The shift of the Anunnaki from celestial rulers to judges of the underworld is one of the most profound transformations in Mesopotamian theology. In the myth of Inanna's descent, the once luminous goddesses and gods, previously associated with the regulation of earthly and heavenly order, assume new roles as adjudicators of death and the afterlife. The Anunnaki, in their capacity as judges of the dead, symbolize the movement from overt power to subterranean authority, from visible decree to silent oversight. Here, the metaphysical mirrors the political. Just as human rulers delegated governance to bureaucracies and provincial authorities, The cosmic rulers delegated judgment to the courts of the underworld, administering justice in ways unseen by the living. Their presence, though less overt, remains essential. They continue to structure the moral and ritual life of humanity even as their dominion shifts from the light of the temples to the shadowed depths of the netherworld. This transition is not merely symbolic. It carries profound theological and psychological implications. By assigning the Anunnaki to the realm of the dead, Mesopotamian texts illustrate the integration of cosmic order with human experience of mortality. Justice, fate, and ritual observance continue to be enforced, but now through mechanisms that operate subtly, indirectly, and inexorably. The Anunnaki are no longer the visible hand of cosmic authority. They are the hidden architecture of law, the judges whose gaze is never absent, but whose presence is understood only through the consequences of their decrees. In this way, the mythology anticipates a principle fundamental to later religious and philosophical systems, that power can transform, persisting in function even when it is no longer apparent in form. A close examination of the textual evolution reveals the gradual diminishment of the Anunnaki's prominence. Early Sumerian texts depict them as central, decisive figures. In later Akkadian and Babylonian writings, their mention becomes increasingly marginal, their roles subsidiary to Marduk and other rising deities. Language itself changes. Verbs of judgment, sovereignty, and command once directly attributed to them are now qualified, mediated, or reassigned. The shift is subtle, detectable only through meticulous philological analysis, yet it reflects a profound reorientation of divine authority. As the Anunnaki are absorbed into a bureaucratic structure, their individual power becomes less relevant than the functional role they serve within the systemic order. They transform from autonomous rulers to instruments of administration, a change mirrored in the political sphere by the centralization of kingship and empire. This textual transformation is also psychological. The narratives of the gods adapt to the needs of human societies, experiencing consolidation, conquest, and cultural synthesis. By reducing the prominence of once independent deities, scribes subtly encode the notion that all authority, celestial and terrestrial alike, is subject to systemic regulation. The Anunnaki's diminution is thus not an erasure, but a literary and ritual reflection of socio-political change, a way of harmonizing the divine cosmology with the evolving human world. Each political upheaval, each reconfiguration of earthly power finds its echo in the arrangement of the divine. The centralization of the Akkadian and Babylonian empires, the rise of Marduk, the reassignment of the Anunnaki to the underworld, all illustrate the principle that human governance and divine order are entwined, that changes in kingship are mirrored by changes in the pantheon. Theology becomes a mirror reflecting political realities, while politics legitimizes theological transformations. In this interplay, the Anunnaki endure not as independent rulers, but as enduring structures within the cosmic bureaucracy, shaping morality, law, and ritual even as their roles evolve. Their story is one of adaptation and resilience, a testament to the capacity of divine constructs to persist, transform, and remain relevant within shifting human contexts. The narrative arc of the Anunnaki across these political and religious transformations demonstrates that the concept of divine authority was never static. Just as empires rise and fall, so too do gods adapt, integrating into new structures, assuming roles that reflect the needs of their adherents and ensuring continuity of cosmic and social order. The gods' endurance is thus not a matter of permanence, but of malleability. They persist through change, a reminder that the sacred and the political are inextricably linked, each shaping and reshaping the other in a continuous dialogue that echoes through time. As the Anunnaki adapted to the shifting empires of Akkad and Babylon, their roles began to transform further, laying the groundwork for the spiritual revolutions yet to come. Empires crumble, kings pass away, and yet the human mind seeks constancy and order, reaching always for the divine as both explanation and guide. In this evolving landscape, new religious frameworks emerged, each reinterpreting, restructuring, and sometimes obliterating the ancient pantheon, while the underlying structures of divine governance subtly persisted. Among the first to reconceptualize the divine in ways radically different from the Mesopotamian cosmos was Zoroastrianism. In the ancient lands of Persia, the notion of a council of gods gave way to the stark duality of Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu, forces of light and darkness engaged in eternal conflict. The once complex hierarchy of deities, with the Anunnaki as judges, legislators, and enforcers of cosmic order, was now condensed into the binary of good and evil. The councils of gods were deemed unnecessary. The cosmic struggle became moral, linear, and intelligible to human perception. Yet even here, traces of the old structure remain visible. The mechanisms of judgment, the ordering of creation, and the notion of intermediaries reflect the bureaucratic patterns that the Anunnaki once embodied. Their presence, though transformed, persists not in name but in function, a reminder that while the forms of divinity may change, the underlying principles often endure. In Zoroastrian ritual, the reverence of fire, the attention to moral conduct, and the system of judgment bear echoes of the meticulous organization that characterized Sumerian temples. The ethical bureaucracy of Ahura Mazda mirrors the divine order once enforced by the Anunnaki. Each act observed, each choice measured, each soul accounted for. The evolution is subtle but profound. The gods of Sumer may have receded from overt prominence, but their archetypal role, mediators of law, order, and cosmic balance, finds renewed expression in the structure of Zoroastrian thought. The past is neither forgotten nor entirely replaced. It is transformed, distilled into a new architecture of the sacred. With the Babylonian exile came a profound re-evaluation of divine authority in the Jewish tradition. The concept of a divine council did not vanish, but was reframed within the strict monotheism that emerged during and after the captivity. The Anunnaki, while absent in name, can be seen as antecedents of the angelic host, mediators of divine will, administrators of moral law, and observers of human deeds. In the Hebrew scriptures, the Council of the Divine operates under the singular sovereignty of Yahweh, a structure reminiscent of the Sumerian bureaucratic order, albeit with a unifying, omnipotent head. The echoes of the Anunnaki's functions are thus embedded in a monotheistic context, demonstrating the persistence of archetypal structures even under radical theological transformation. Prophetic writings and later rabbinic texts reveal that the meticulous organization of heaven, the hierarchies of angels, and the regulation of earthly events continue to reflect the legacy of Mesopotamian divine administration. Here too, one observes a continuity that transcends form. Authority is preserved, but it is now centralized, moralized, and integrated into a narrative that emphasizes obedience, accountability, and cosmic justice. The Anunnaki's indirect influence persists in the structuring of spiritual and ethical order, proving that the essence of their role endures even as their names are forgotten and their forms transformed. As monotheism evolved further into Christianity, the old gods of Mesopotamia were reinterpreted through the lens of duality, sin, and redemption. The Anunnaki, once overseers of law and cosmic balance, are transformed into demons or fallen figures in a moral universe dominated by a singular, omnipotent God. The heavenly bureaucracy persists, however, through the angelic hierarchy and the organization of saints and divine intermediaries. The function remains even as the form is inverted. What was once a council of justice becomes a framework of temptation, guidance, and judgment, emphasizing morality and spiritual consequence rather than governance of earthly affairs. Christian narratives often depict the remnants of ancient divine structures as shadows, echoes, or inverted reflections. The meticulous attention to order, responsibility, and hierarchical mediation, the hallmarks of the Anunnaki, survives in these transformed forms. Each angel, each tribunal of the heavenly host, each divine interaction continues the archetypal function, ensuring that the moral and cosmic order is maintained, even as the language, names, and cultural context shift dramatically. In this sense, the Anunnaki are neither destroyed nor irrelevant. They have been sublimated into a new ethical and spiritual architecture, their bureaucratic precision redirected toward salvation and divine oversight. With the rise of Islam, the trajectory of divine transformation reaches a point of absolute centralization. The monotheistic principle of Tawhid, the oneness of God, closes the chapter on the multiplicity of divine agents in the formal practice of religion. The Anunnaki, like other ancient deities, disappear from ritual observance and official theology. Yet the underlying structure persists in subtle ways. The concepts of angels, jinn, and metaphysical order continue the bureaucratic and functional patterns established by the Anunnaki. The organization of celestial beings, the meticulous attention to moral conduct, and the surveillance of human affairs echo the ancestral roles of the Sumerian pantheon, reframed within an uncompromising monotheistic framework. Islamic theology preserves the principles of hierarchy, accountability, and cosmic regulation without invoking the names of the old gods. The functional legacy of the Anunnaki is embedded in the metaphysical architecture: divine law enforced through intermediaries, moral order upheld through a system of observation and reward, and a cosmic structure that mirrors the administrative principles first articulated in Sumer. Though their form has vanished, their blueprint endures, proving once more that divine influence transcends nomenclature and mythic identity. Despite the radical transformations across these religious traditions, a remarkable continuity emerges. The Anunnaki, while absent in name, survive as structures, functions, and archetypes within successive spiritual systems. The Council of Gods becomes the angelic hierarchy, the demons of Christian theology, and the celestial agents in Islam. The principles of judgment, mediation, and administration persist, attesting to the enduring logic of cosmic order first codified in the clay tablets of Sumer. Their story is not one of extinction, but of adaptation, from visible rulers to bureaucratic intermediaries, from mythic figures to metaphysical principles. The Anunnaki endure in the architecture of belief, their influence woven into the moral, ethical, and spiritual frameworks that continue to shape human consciousness. In this continuum, we see the profound lesson of history and theology. Forms may change, names may vanish, and rituals may fade, but the underlying principles of order, mediation, and accountability, the essence of the Anunnaki's authority, persist. They are reflected in the structures of later religions, in the hierarchies of spiritual beings, and in the persistent human need for cosmic and ethical order. Transformation, rather than disappearance, defines the trajectory of the divine, and through this lens, the Anunnaki are revealed not as lost gods, but as enduring patterns, ever present beneath the evolving tapestry of human faith. As the grand theological frameworks reshaped the roles of the Anunnaki, traces of their presence persisted quietly among the people, embedded not in the grand temples of kings, but in the lived rituals and whispered traditions of ordinary communities. Even as empires centralized and monotheistic faiths claimed authority over the heavens, the echoes of older gods lingered in subtle, often overlooked practices, rituals whose origins stretched back to the earliest clay tablets and whose endurance defied the sweep of official history. In the city of Haran, on the edge of Mesopotamia, the worship of the moon god Sin persisted long after the collapse of Akkadian and Babylonian authority. The Sabians of Haran maintained observances that intertwined celestial calculation with spiritual devotion. Here, the Anunnaki were not named explicitly, yet their functional legacy endured. Lunar cycles dictated sacred timing, offerings and hymns preserved the structure of ritual, and the celestial bureaucracy of old remained encoded in the very pattern of devotion. The meticulous observation of the heavens, once the domain of Sumerian priests and temple scribes, became part of the fabric of daily life, embedding divine order into agricultural practice, communal calendars, and moral observance. Through these surviving rituals, the once mighty Anunnaki continued to shape human experience, their presence tangible not in temples of stone, but in the rhythms of the cosmos as interpreted by devoted observers. These communities exemplify the endurance of ancient authority in ways imperceptible to official history. While empires and formal religions sought to codify power, the people preserved the patterns of the past in domestic, local, and personal spheres. The structure, hierarchy, and order once enforced by the Anunnaki were internalized into collective memory, ritual observance, and the governance of time itself. Their influence, subtle and persistent, illustrates the resilience of the sacred across centuries. Across villages and settlements, the seasonal mourning of Tammuz, or Dumuzi, endured for centuries, a testament to the power of memory and ritual to transcend the dictates of formal religion. Women wept for the dying god, reciting laments that preserved ancient narratives of fertility, death, and renewal. These ceremonies, often conducted outside the purview of temples sanctioned by central authorities, maintained a living connection to the divine cycles once overseen by the Anunnaki. The gods, though marginalized in official theologies, continued to inhabit the world of human emotion, their stories enacted in grief, song, and seasonal observances. The rituals linked the cosmic to the communal, reminding participants of their place within a universe structured by the enduring logic of divine order. The continuity of Tammuz observances underscores a profound truth. Divine authority is not solely enforced by kings or priests, but sustained through the embodied practices of communities. Each lament, each ceremonial gesture, acts as a vessel of memory, preserving patterns of cosmic governance and moral expectation long after the official record falls silent. Here, the Anunnaki persist not as figures of power, but as structures of meaning, embedded in the cycles of life, death, and human response to the world. Over time, many of the ancient rituals metamorphosed into seemingly mundane customs. Practices such as knocking on wood or casting salt carry vestiges of ancient protective rites once performed in the context of divine oversight. These customs, detached from their original mythic and ceremonial frameworks, nonetheless encode the principles of mediation, observation, and ritualized respect for unseen forces. The Anunnaki's influence, filtered through centuries of cultural adaptation, survives in these habits, reminding us that the divine continues to shape human thought and behavior even when unrecognized or unnamed. In this way, the long memory of the people acts as a bridge, linking the grandeur of Mesopotamian cosmology with the intimate quotidian practices of daily life. Such persistence illustrates the elasticity of sacred structures. They endure not only in formal texts or liturgies, but in embodied, practical expressions. The bureaucratic precision of the Anunnaki, once evident in the detailed records of scribes, now manifests in the ordered patterns of domestic ritual, communal observance, and folk practice. The sacred is democratized, diffused into the everyday, yet no less real or influential in its effects. As Christianity and Islam expanded, the popular remnants of Anunnaki-linked worship faced increasing pressure. Missionary campaigns, religious policing, and doctrinal enforcement sought to eliminate polytheistic rites and lunar observances, labeling them as heretical or pagan. Yet, even under duress, elements of the old practices adapted, survived in hidden forms, or merged with new religious frameworks. The suppression was not total. The ancient rhythms persisted in disguised, localized forms, reflecting the tenacity of cultural memory and the depth of embedded structures. The Anunnaki's bureaucratic and moral legacy thus continued to influence human behavior and belief indirectly, even as official recognition faded. Adaptation became survival, and survival ensured continuity of the underlying principles encoded in ritual, morality, and cosmological understanding. The dynamic between imposed orthodoxy and local custom highlights the resilience of human religious imagination. Where official channels failed, the subtler channels of folk observance preserved continuity. In this light, the Anunnaki's absence from formal worship is not disappearance, but transformation, a migration of influence from grand temples to the domestic and communal spaces of ordinary life. Ultimately, the decline of the Anunnaki and other ancient deities was neither violent nor abrupt. It was a gradual fading, a slow attrition through cultural and religious evolution. They did not vanish in cataclysm or conquest, but receded as memory, ritual, and narrative were reorganized, reinterpreted, and sometimes suppressed. What remains is a quiet echo, an invisible scaffolding beneath the spiritual life of successive generations. The gods died slowly, not through battle, but through the inexorable passage of time, the layering of new beliefs, and the subtle shifts in human consciousness. Yet their influence, though muted, persisted in the structures they left behind, in ritual, law, moral expectation, and the ordering of cosmic and temporal life. In observing this process, one realizes that disappearance is rarely absolute. The Anunnaki, though no longer invoked by name in everyday practice, survive in the patterns, frameworks, and organizational principles of human belief and behavior. They remind us that the sacred is not solely a matter of visibility or formal recognition, but of enduring structure, internalized order, and cultural memory. Even in silence they speak, and in absence they persist. As the memory of the Anunnaki persisted quietly within popular rituals, their significance began to be understood less as external authority and more as a presence intertwined with human action and perception. Their legacy, rather than being confined to names and temples, had become embedded in the very fabric of human religious consciousness. Across centuries and cultures, the notion of the divine evolved. Gods were no longer merely figures of cosmic governance, but presence is realized through ritual, observance, and the moral life of their adherents. From the earliest Sumerian temples to the folk practices that endured in villages, long after empires collapsed, it becomes evident that gods existed primarily through human interaction. They were inseparable from ritual. Offerings, laments, prayers, and seasonal observances were not merely symbolic. They constituted the medium through which divine presence manifested. Without ritual, the Anunnaki, like other deities, would be abstracted, distant, and ineffectual. Their authority depended upon human acknowledgement and participation, suggesting that divinity is relational rather than ontologically independent. The act of worship itself sustained them, making ritual the vessel of existence and the conduit through which cosmic order was enacted on earth. Every gesture in prayer, every meticulous observance of liturgical timing echoes the bureaucratic precision of the Anunnaki, whose roles in administration, judgment, and enforcement were historically recorded in clay tablets. The gods' endurance through ritual demonstrates a continuity of structure and function. The patterns they established in governance and cosmic order are mirrored in ceremonial precision and ethical vigilance. Theological reflection deepens this understanding. Rudolf Otto's concept of the noumen, the profound sense of awe and sanctity that accompanies divine encounter, illuminates why gods endure even as their forms and names transform. The Anunnaki, as expressions of cosmic order, evoke the noumen in their human observers. They inspire reverence, fear, and ethical reflection. This sensation is not tied to any single theological formulation, but transcends culture and epoch, migrating from Sumerian polytheism to Zoroastrian dualism, to monotheistic frameworks, and even into modern spiritual imagination. The experience of sacred awe, the encounter with the ineffable, ensures the continuity of the Anunnaki's archetypal role. They remain touchstones for human engagement with the transcendent. Through ritual and memory, the numinous presence that the Anunnaki once embodied continues to shape ethical and spiritual consciousness. Even in traditions that have eradicated their names, the structured feeling of awe, the ordered approach to cosmic and moral law, persists. Their essence, distilled into the experience of reverence, demonstrates that divine influence can survive the erosion of literal belief. Despite transformations across time and theology, the organizational blueprint of the Anunnaki remains evident. The councils of gods evolved into hierarchies of angels and spiritual intermediaries. The judicial functions of the deities are mirrored in moral oversight and metaphysical justice. The bureaucratic precision survives in the ordered administration of cosmic and social law. Across civilizations, these structural principles endure even if the gods themselves are renamed, reinterpreted, or inverted. The continuity lies not in the mythic figures, but in the architecture of authority, mediation, and ethical oversight that they exemplified. This structural persistence illustrates a fundamental principle. Divine influence is durable when encoded as function rather than form. The Anunnaki's bureaucratic, ethical, and ritualistic roles have been inherited, adapted, and repurposed across millennia, highlighting the human tendency to preserve and replicate frameworks of order even as symbolic language shifts. In essence, the Anunnaki survive as principles of cosmic management, moral mediation, and ritual precision, ensuring continuity amidst change. The trajectory of the Anunnaki across human history is one of incremental metamorphosis. Initially supreme arbiters of law and order, they were absorbed into the celestial bureaucracy under Marduk, reassigned as judges of the underworld, transformed into angelic hierarchies, or demonized in Christian thought, and finally internalized as patterns of moral and ritual consciousness. Each stage reflects a subtle adaptation, responding to socio-political change, theological innovation, and cultural memory. They were not eradicated, they evolved, their essence preserved in new forms that continue to structure human experience of the sacred and the ethical. This gradual transformation emphasizes that divinity is dynamic. The gods are not static objects to be captured in stone or text, but living constructs, continually reshaped by the interaction between human consciousness and the sacred. The Anunnaki, far from being lost to history, are enduring templates of order, justice, and structured presence, reflecting the evolution of human understanding of the divine. Ultimately, the Anunnaki serve as symbols of theological and cultural evolution. Their journey from visible rulers to bureaucratic intermediaries, to judges of death, to archetypes within monotheistic and folk traditions, illustrates the adaptability of divine constructs to human needs, cognition, and society. They did not disappear, they transformed, providing continuity of principle while allowing for the radical reinterpretation of form, function, and significance. They are reminders that divinity is inseparable from human perception and ritual, that authority is relational, and that sacred structures endure through adaptation. The Anunnaki's story is a narrative of persistence through metamorphosis. They evolve alongside humanity, their form shifting, but their underlying function, structuring moral, cosmic, and ritual order, remaining intact. In this, they exemplify the broader truth of theology, that gods survive not only through belief in their names, but through the perpetuation of the frameworks they instantiate. As symbols, they continue to illuminate the dynamic interplay between human consciousness, ritual practice, and the eternal quest for order in the cosmos. As the Anunnaki evolved through history, from the scribal records of Sumer to the subtle frameworks of modern religious consciousness, their presence never fully vanished. Though centuries of transformation reshaped their roles, the patterns they established, cosmic order, moral mediation, ritual precision, continue to reverberate through the human imagination. The gods of old, once localized and material, now inhabit new realms of existence, visible less in temples of stone and clay than in the vast, interconnected networks of thought, media, and culture that define the present age. In contemporary discourse, the Anunnaki have been recast as extraterrestrial beings, figures of speculation and fascination across the digital landscapes of the Internet. No longer worshipped in conventional religious terms, they occupy forums, videos, podcasts, and documentaries as symbols of mystery, intelligence, and the unknown. The human need to connect with what lies beyond perception remains unchanged. Only the context has shifted. Just as ancient scribes translated the rhythms of life into clay and ink, modern audiences translate wonder and curiosity into digital media, reconstructing the Anunnaki as entities compatible with contemporary frameworks of thought, scientific, imaginative, and conspiratorial. Their mythic structures endure, refracted through new lenses, serving the same functions of awe, ethical reflection, and mediation between known and unknown. Even in this transformation, the Anunnaki retain the archetypal roles that have defined them for millennia. Authority, observation, judgment, and intervention persist, whether conceived as divine bureaucrats or alien overseers. The fundamental patterns of interaction between higher order and human society remain legible, proving that the essence of the sacred can migrate across media and epochs without losing coherence. The rituals of today are subtle, but no less potent. Engagement with media, Watching videos, participating in online discussions, subscribing to channels is a form of communal acknowledgement. It mirrors the ancient act of ritual participation, observing, repeating, interpreting, and sharing knowledge that sustains the symbolic presence of the Anunnaki. Podcasts and documentaries, while secular in appearance, function as contemporary shrines, hosting narratives that structure understanding, provoke reflection, and inspire both fear and reverence. The continuity is unmistakable. Human beings persist in ritualizing their encounter with the extraordinary, encoding patterns of attention, awe, and moral consideration, just as ancient cultures did through liturgy, hymn, and lament. In these practices, the Anunnaki's legacy is apparent. They are no longer literal rulers, judges, or administrators, yet they continue to shape thought, belief, and imagination. Their endurance is not tied to temples or formal theology, but to the patterns of human engagement that replicate the structures of attention, respect, and ethical consideration inherent in the sacred. Across time, the Anunnaki have become more than historical figures. They are enduring symbols of adaptation, persistence, and transformation. Each era remolds them according to prevailing needs. Bureaucrats in Sumer, judges of the underworld, angels and demons in later faiths, and now beings of mystery in popular media. What remains constant is their functional essence, structuring thought, mediating between the known and unknown, and inspiring reverence. Every transformation demonstrates the human impulse to project cosmic order onto reality, to maintain frameworks of morality and comprehension, and to personify forces beyond ordinary perception. The Anunnaki endure not because of ritual worship alone, but because of the persistent patterns they embody, patterns that remain intelligible and compelling across centuries and cultures. This endurance reflects a profound truth about mythology and human cognition. Symbols survive when they encode functional principles rather than static forms. The Anunnaki persist because they provide templates for understanding complexity, morality, and the unseen, archetypal structures that adapt to every new medium, belief system, and intellectual framework. As we engage with these ancient figures, we are invited to confront a deeper question. What gods are we creating now, often without conscious recognition? The Anunnaki of the digital age are products of imagination, interpretation, and narrative construction. Similarly, each tweet, each viral video, each collective belief or fear becomes a site where new forms of divinity or symbolic authority are generated. We inhabit a world in which human creativity continues to forge sacred presences, echoing the processes that created the Anunnaki and their successors. The patterns persist: appearance, transformation, marginalization, and renewal, in an eternal cycle where every generation reconfigures the divine according to its understanding and needs. By examining the Anunnaki, we perceive not just the past, but the mechanisms by which humanity invents, adapts, and sustains meaning. Every myth, every belief, every digital reconstruction is a thread in the ongoing tapestry of sacred imagination, linking us to the distant scribes of Mesopotamia while projecting forward into unforeseen futures. And so, the wind blows across the ruins, carrying whispers of gods once visible in flesh and clay, now inscribed in memory, ritual, and imagination. The cycle repeats: emergence, transformation, fading, and re-emergence in new forms. The Anunnaki, though silent in the tablets and absent from temples, remain present in the structures of thought, the patterns of belief, and the human impulse to reach beyond the tangible. Their journey through history reminds us that the sacred is not confined to monuments or names, but lives in the perpetual rhythm of human consciousness, forever appearing, forever changing, forever shaping the ways in which we comprehend our place in the cosmos. Through this lens, the Anunnaki are eternal, not as objects of worship, but as enduring principles, invisible yet structurally necessary, whispering through the ages, guiding imagination, and witnessing the ceaseless dance of humanity with the unknown.